In a bustling town where everyone sought hope and miracles, a new church rose to prominence. Its towering golden gates and marble floors glittered in the sunlight, luring in both the poor and the wealthy. The name of the church was the House of Eternal Blessings, and its leader, Pastor Gideon, was a charismatic man who spoke with a soothing voice that seemed to touch the heavens. To many, Pastor Gideon was the definition of holiness. He was generous, often giving food to the hungry and paying school fees for orphans in his congregation. His sermons were captivating, filled with promises of breakthroughs, wealth, and healing. He had a choir that sang like angels and ushers, who smiled as if they carried the joy of God within them. But behind the smiles, unholy facade lay a dark, sinister truth. Years before Pastor Gideon opened his church, he was a struggling man with nothing to his name. Desperate for wealth and power, he wandered into the forest in the dead of night, searching for answers. There, he met a dark figure, a shadow that promised him the world. The deal was simple. The shadow would give Gideon wealth, fame, and power, but in return, Gideon would sacrifice the destinies of his followers. Blinded by greed, Gideon agreed. He was instructed to build a church and draw in as many souls as possible. The larger his congregation, the more powerful he would become. Each prayer, each offering, and each almond would be silently stolen from his followers and offered to the dark force. The church grew quickly. People flocked to it, believing Pastor Gideon was sent by God. Testimonies of miraculous healings and sudden wealth spread like wildfire, drawing in even more members. Little did they know that every miracle came at a cost. A young woman named Ada, who had once been vibrant and full of dreams, found herself trapped in misery by joining the church. She had given her life savings as an offering, believing she would receive divine blessings. Instead, her business crumbled and her health deteriorated. A promising young man, Chaik, who had just secured a scholarship abroad, joined the church with his mother. The day after he attended a special service, his scholarship was revoked, and he fell into depression. The same pattern followed countless others: a woman who lost her husband, a man whose crops failed, a family who suddenly became homeless. But no one suspected the pastor. They blamed their misfortune on bad luck or lack of faith. One fateful Sunday, a stranger named Obina entered the church. He was quiet, unassuming, and sat at the back, observing everything. Obina had travelled from a distant village, there hearing about the strange happenings surrounding the church. He was not an ordinary man. He was a prophet. As the service progressed, Pastor Gideon preached passionately about blessings and breakthroughs, urging members to sow seeds of faith. The congregation roared in agreement, waving their offerings in the air. But Obina noticed something strange. A shadow-like figure stood behind Pastor Gideon, whispering into his ear. With each word spoken by the pastor, the shadow grew larger, feeding off the energy in the room. That night, Obina stayed behind, pretending to pray. When everyone else left, he hid in the church and waited. At midnight, he saw Pastor Gideon enter with a strange black box. Gideon knelt before the pulpit, chanting in a language that sent chills down Obina's spine. The black box opened, and the thick, dark mist poured out, forming into the shadow. "You've brought me enough souls for today," the shadow said, its voice echoing like thunder. "But you must do more. I demand a special sacrifice, a child." Gideon trembled, but nodded. "Yes, Master." The next Sunday, Obina returned to the church with a plan. During the service, he stood up and shouted, "Pastor Gideon, the Lord has revealed your secret." The congregation gasped. Pastor Gideon tried to laugh it off, but his hands shook. "What nonsense are you talking about?" he bellowed. Obina stepped forward, his eyes blazing with righteous anger. "You are no man of God. You have stolen the destinies of these people and sold them to darkness. You made a pact with the devil." The church erupted in chaos. Some people tried to silence Obina, but others began questioning the pastor. Gideon's mask began to crack. Suddenly, the lights flickered. and the shadow appeared in the middle of the church. The congregation screamed and ran for the exits, but the doors slammed shut. The shadow laughed, revealing its grotesque form. "You dare to expose my servant," it growled. Obina knelt and prayed, his voice firm and unwavering. "By the power of the Almighty, I command you to leave this place." The shadow screeched, but Obina's prayers grew louder. The air filled with a blinding light, and the shadow began to dissolve. With one final scream, it disappeared, leaving Pastor Gideon trembling on the ground. The congregation learned the truth that day. Pastor Gideon confessed his sins, weeping as he begged for forgiveness, but it was too late. The church was abandoned, and the people scattered, returning to rebuild their lives. Obina warned them to be cautious of the churches they attended, urging them to seek God directly and not be swayed by earthly appearances. The town learned a bitter lesson that not all that glitters is gold, and not every man of God is truly of God. The moral lesson of this story is that we should be discerning, and do not blindly follow anyone who claims to be a servant of God. Test every spirit and seek the truth for yourself.